It was set aside back in 1935. It set a precedent in the United States. It was the first time we set aside a large piece of land, not because it made a pretty postcard, but rather for the protection of life within its borders. And what you find here is an assemblage of life arguably unlike anything else on the planet. So we're going to see a sliver of that today, a tiny little part of that. The park itself is huge, 1.5 million acres in size. It's the third largest national park in the country. It's massive. And when you look at the park, and you'll all get a copy of this map when we go into the visitor center, you'll see it's very colorful, and each one of the colors represents a different ecosystem in the park. If you look at it broadly, you can think of the park as being separated into thirds. The lower 1/3 of the park, this light blue color area, is open estuary water, Florida Bay. The middle 1/3 is this dark green patch that you see stretching all up the coast. That is what? Anyone know?
Here. Mountain.
Mangrove. Mangrove forest. The longest, largest protected mangrove forest in the northern hemisphere, right here at Everglades National Park. If you look at the upper 1/3, it's this light yellow and light green. And this is slough and prairie habitat. This is quintessential Everglades. This is what people think about when they talk about the Everglades. Yeah, this is the area that we're going to be exploring today for the most part. But I want you to remember, keep in the back of your mind, the mangrove forest and the bay, because we may be talking about these areas during our time exploring the Everglades today. We're not going far. We're only going to see a small sliver of this park. After we're done here at the Visitor Center, we'll drive into Royal Palm Visitor Center and explore the Anhinga Trail, one of the best wildlife viewing opportunities in the park. We might take time to stroll on the Gumbo Limbo Trail as well, cruise into Long Pine Key for a little bit of lunch, and if time permits, stop off at Paheoki Overlook, the only observation platform in the park, and give you a nice aerial view of this quintessential Everglades area. Right? So you'll only have seen a tiny little portion of this 1.5 million acre area. And despite how big this park is, you'll probably already realize that the park itself only protects about the lower 1/5 of the much larger historic Everglades ecosystem. A watershed that stretches about 250 miles north of where we are to roughly where Orlando and Disney World sit today. Right? A lot of changes have happened between Disney World and Everglades National Park where we are right now. And all those upstream effects have had effects downstream as well. We may talk about those. But really the focus of today, the focus of the next few hours that we have together, is talk about what is it about this place that justifies our endeavoring to embark on the largest hydrologic restoration project on the planet. Why is this place worthy of $20 billion worth of investment and several decades worth of effort? And is it? I don't know. Together, we'll find out. Okay. But before we get started on all of this, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity. I know you've been on the bus for a while. Again, restrooms are across the way if you need to use it. I also want to give you just about 15 minutes to explore our visitor center across the boardwalk if you'd like. Check out the exhibits, the short video there if you'd like. We won't have an opportunity because of time constraints to stop here at the end of the day. So this is sort of your one and only opportunity at the bookstore in there. Grab some maps and publications from our visitor center desk. Got about 15 minutes, okay? And then at the end of that, let's meet back out here before we load back on the bus. Good deal?
So, excuse
Yes,
me.
please.
哦，这里边是它有很多这个。是他们有宣传做的这个啊，是吧？包括这。把它的构造表达出来是吧
Landscape.
Naturalists saw those trees from a mile away, and they made the journey 3 miles from westernmost Miami to find out what these trees were all about. In water, sometimes up to their chest. 3-mile trek. Most people from Miami didn't do that. The perception at the time was that the Everglades was a swamp filled with disease and things that would eat you and kill you. So no one made that journey, except for those few hardy scientists, those few hardy botanists that discovered this place. And what they found here was a Caribbean garden unlike anything else in North America. This became Florida's first state park in 1916, and eventually, when the park was established, became the nucleus of Everglades National Park. This place, despite all the wildlife that we have here, really was protected because of the plants more than anything. So what Carlos has in his hands right now is a leopard grasshopper. This is the largest grasshopper species that we have in North America. You're going to find them all along the trail as you walk on through. And in the Everglades, everything has its season. And you're lucky that you're here, and somewhere else you'd never see one of these guys. They're summertime only. And they're kind of interesting in that the grasshoppers themselves are very, very large, but they've got very tiny wings. So unlike locusts or other grasshopper species, they can't actually fly effectively. The wings serve an ulterior purpose. I think that's edible. You think so, huh? I'll let you try first. The wings are used in courtship rituals with females, those bright purple or pink fuchsia wings. And they're also a warning to predators because they are slightly toxic if eaten, and so they don't taste very good. And we have visitors all the time that'll come here. In some places you fish with grasshoppers and crickets, and they'll find one of these guys, and they'll take it in their hand and they'll throw it in the water. These guys swim very well. They swim on the surface, and they swim from the middle of the canal right back to the bank, and all the wildlife just watches and doesn't take a swipe because they know that they don't taste very good. Give me that camera, let me get the picture.
Are there many poisonous ones?
Good question. We've got more species and subspecies of snake here than any other area in the country. We've got, within the state of Florida, about 80. But of those, only 6 are actually venomous. And we very seldom see them, to be honest. I'm glad to hear we saw one here, though. It's been a long time since I've seen one here.
Native species, native fish here are exotic fish in Japan.
We trade back and forth. This is what we do. So remember I told you, early Miamians thought this place was just a giant swamp. But standing here, you realize you're totally wrong. What you see here is evidence that what you're looking at is not a swamp. It's actually got a flowing, measurable current augmented here. This is actually a river system. And that's why you can walk all through this park and you never get that smell of hydrogen sulfide, that decay aroma. It doesn't stick around long enough. The nutrients are constantly cycling through this flow.
Tell me where we are.
So we're right now. We're seeing the upper end of this Taylor. This is the river.
Oh, this river.
Right? So you're looking south right
So
here.
looking this.
Water's going north to south.
Oh,
Yeah?
I see. It's just in the edge of
It's a big park.
the big park.
This man's prepared right here. You're going to be my ranger in training today. You tell us what that is that you're looking at.
Well, could you tell me the name of that bird?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a honeycomb? No?
It's a close relative of it, right? So cormorants are here.
Yeah.
And what you're looking at is right here. Almost looks like it's posed the same way. So this is the Enhinga. And this one here, black throughout the body, neck, and head. But you notice this one's brownish on the neck and head and breast. So the difference is male, female.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Unhinga.
Kind of weird in birds. Usually the male birds are brighter in coloration. In this case, it's the other way around. Trees, people think that they're mangroves. They're kind of like freshwater mangroves. This is a Nona glabra. And this is the most that the flower opens up. This is it. You never see anything. But you got to know the secret to turn it upside down and to open it and expose what's inside. And what we have is one of the prettiest blooms that we have here in the Everglades. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? You'll only see this if you're a pollinator. You'll only see this if this is one of the bugs that crawls up. It's got that really pretty center nectary, right? That encourages all sorts of pollinators to visit. And this is great. I didn't expect to see a flower out because we're so late in the season. When we get and see the other pond apple trees, you'll see that once these are pollinated, they'll grow a big, large fruit, a big apple, which is edible, as a matter of fact, and feeds a lot of the wildlife out here. Did you get a picture?
I'm not a concern.
What was the name?
This is called pond apple or Annona glabra. Oh. We didn't get that. Pretty much everything that we've been walking past has been artificial. It's been a canal that's been paralleling the road, and that's the way we build roads in South Florida. Dig out a canal, pile it up, and use that fill before you pave the roadway. So the area is very artificial. In fact, the area we're about to walk through right now is incredibly artificial. It's a big borrow pit. So we've dug out fill, put it on top, and built the visitor center. These areas are important for alligators. Let me go back. Alligators are the engineers of the Everglades. They probably talked about this at Loxahatchee, right? When the dry season hits and the park goes bone dry, the alligators need to have water to survive, not to drink, but to thermoregulate. They can't warm up their bodies, but they also can't cool them down, and so they need that water to bathe in to thermoregulate. So when the park goes bone dry, what do the alligators do? The alligators use their giant bodies, move their bulk from side to side, and they dig a pool, a swimming pool for themselves in the marsh. You don't have to dig very far before the water comes up, and you've got a pool of water, fresh water. Good for the gator, but also the turtles, the fish, the invertebrates, the snakes that all need that water as well, and they all move in. So this alligator's brilliant. He's not only built himself his own swimming pool, but he's also now has a living buffet that he can feed off during the dry season. When you have areas like this, though, that we've artificially dug out, the alligators don't have to build their holes anymore, right? And so they congregate in these areas. So everything that we're seeing here, although it's artificial, is a big congregating place for these alligators. The park stays open 24 hours a day. If you wanted to come out here at 3 o'clock in the morning, just you and a flashlight, you could do that. And you could walk this trail. And in winter, you would count 50, 60, 70 pairs of beady red eyes looking back at you. We're having a tough time finding these gators today, primarily because it's beautiful out. And so they're all in the water. If it were overcast, if it were shady, they'd be up on land basking, trying to get warm. But right now, we've got to keep our eyes on the water and see if we spot one or two. But even here, I want you to just take note, that water's constantly moving north to south. This is literally a huge river. Some of you mentioned that you're working in Louisiana, some of the cypress forests or mangrove areas, right?
Yeah, it's Japanese, yeah. You are...
Yep, we were saying that he's
and
working on...
has a size in the Louisiana, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And in Louisiana, in the United States, we generally consider the Mississippi River to be the largest river in North America, right? But that depends. Old Man River, the Mississippi, from the point of its source down to its delta, averages only about a mile in width, right? The fact that we recognize that this is now a riverine system, you've got to also recognize how big it is. During peak water, this river could range anywhere from 30 to 50 miles across. So it's certainly not the world's fastest. It's certainly not North America's deepest. But by all accounts, this is the widest river system in North America. It's just seasonal. I just pulled it out of the swamp. You want to drink this stuff? Are you serious?
Yeah, I think
I do it
should be okay.
every day.
It's sweet.
Every day. Every day that I'm out here. Anyway.
I think
And I got news for you. You guys are staying at the Hyatt? You drank it all day yesterday. It's the same exact stuff that's coming out of your faucet at the hotel. Yeah, we clean it a little bit. But to be honest with you, all this water that's at the surface just trickles down to the Biscayne Aquifer, the geologic feature beneath it, and that's what we pump out for all the drinking water at home. And we don't have to do a lot to it. This is classified as an outstanding water source here in the state of Florida. And I can tell you that every single time I'm out here, I take a little sip. It tastes wonderful. It tastes like Gatorade. I don't know why. But you can literally see how clear it is. And so I only draw your attention to this because when we talk about this place, when we talk about this landscape, you know, when you talk about these areas that are 1.5 million acres in size, it's hard to wrap our minds around all the ecosystem processes that are happening here. It's hard to quantify that. We know that, right? Think about the gas exchange, the nutrient cycling, the water filtration, soil erosional control, carbon sequestration is happening in all these areas. It's hard to put that in a quantifiable framework and hard to understand exactly what this means, not only for the local community that's benefiting directly from having this outstanding water source, but for all of us that live abroad that are benefiting from the processes as well. And when we talk about why we're investing so much time and money and effort into this place, that has to somehow make its way into that equation as well. You all know that's a tough thing to do.
It's great.
This is all fresh water here until you get a little bit further down the road, and that's where we start seeing tidal influence.
I see.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Anyone want a sip?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now, that
Ice
is a very big alligator for us here in the Everglades. Those of you that have spent time in Louisiana, right? When we get people that visit us from Louisiana, they laugh at our alligators because they say, we've got gators bigger than that living in our backyards. And it's true. For reasons that we don't fully understand just yet, the further you move down the state of Florida, the smaller the alligators generally tend to become. We think that has something to do with not only food sources down here, but also the fact that they don't overwinter here necessarily. They don't enter that state of torpor or hibernation that they do elsewhere, wherein they have to bulk themselves up beforehand. And also has to do probably with island biogeography. The closer or further you move away down a peninsula, the more reduced your wildlife typically becomes in size. So our alligator here, even though he's very big for us, is relatively small compared to alligators elsewhere. By the way, this is the only place on the planet where both alligators and crocodiles live side by side. So alligators, there's only two species in the world. The American alligator and the...
Which alligator?
There's only two places on the planet that alligators exist. Right? Southeastern United States is one, that's the American alligator. The other is the Chinese alligator.
Oh,
right? So we're lucky. We're the only ones with alligators. Throughout the rest of the world, there's caimans and crocodiles, right? And this is the only place where we've got the American alligator and American crocodile that live kind of side by side. For the most part, the alligators hang out in fresh water. Crocodiles hang out in brackish water. There are select times, like right now, during the year where there's enough fresh water pulsing southward that it makes that area hospitable to both. And so literally right now, September, October, are the times you could theoretically see an alligator and a crocodile hanging out together at the bar drinking. The rest of the year, that doesn't happen all that often. Serpentine thing crawling through the reeds that I've now lost sight of, but it was really, it looked like a snake, but not really. Surrounded on all sides by water. Well, we have keys inland as well. And it's the same thing functionally. This island that we're looking at across the way, all these trees, is an island surrounded almost all year long by water. It's just an inland island. Okay? So we're going to take a second and we're going to walk on that trail and just feel the difference between where we're walking in the slough right now and what one of these forested areas looks like. The word Everglades is unique to this area. There's nowhere else on the planet that's called Everglades. It's believed to have found its origins from the British when their surveyors were here. At the time that they were surveying this area, the term glade in the British vernacular was any open grassy area that was found in the middle of a very dense forest. And the cartographers got here and they looked at this expanse and they found this wide open grassy area with little pockets of trees in between it. And so they called this place Forever Glade or Evergrassy, and the name stuck. So let's see what one of those little tree islands looks like. Knock this tree completely on its side, and from wherever it lands, it'll take root and start growing again. Right? And you'll see evidence of that as you go through the hammock. This tree is tropical in distribution. It's found throughout Central and Northern South America, where it's sometimes called the fence post tree. Natives will go up and harvest all the branches, take them back to their property, and plant them as a living fence line along their properties. Cool. Feel it. It's cool to the touch. All the water in that tree is right up near the surface of the clump. Keeps it cool all day long. Called Coccoloba diversifolia, or pigeon plum, right, locally. And pigeon plum, when it begins its life down at the bottom of these forests, has these very large, very long leaves to them. As they grow throughout the canopy, those leaves will become smaller and smaller until they get up to the very top of the canopy and they're only that big around, right? Diversifolia, diverse foliage. The reason is, obviously, the lower you are, the more leaf surface you want to capture as much light as possible. The higher you get, you don't need that as much, and in fact, you want to conserve water, and so your leaves get smaller. An amazingly adaptable species down here. Times. But two, you and I, we are natural enemies of this guy. And so for most areas of the park, if you encounter an alligator like this, they'll typically turn tail and run. And yet this guy turned to face us. He wants to be friendly. Not surprisingly, this guy probably gets fed quite a lot since we're next to the picnic area. They do become habituated to people, and that's a major source of problem for us down here. But it's really great for photo ops. So here he comes.
No, don't feed.
对，不能喂它这个。
啊，非常友好的。
非常友好。哦，你看，整个背肌露出来了。它潜到水底去。Hello。哦。
穿到爱它都不需要1秒钟。
穿到岸上。
穿到岸上正常时间。
这是很完整的这个照片，能照完吗？
There's a lot of other stuff happening in the background, though, that may compromise our ability to do that. One of those issues is invasive species, and we've been talking, a couple of you have been talking about the role that you play in figuring out the invasive species situation in your own areas. We have, just south of Lake Okeechobee, where you are right now, a little more than 300 plant and animal species that are established in the area that we're constantly monitoring. And lately, the one that's gotten all the attention is the one that all of you guys have asked me about. That's this guy. All right. Starting in the year 2000, actually in the late 90s, we started finding these guys fairly frequently in the park. And we didn't just start finding them in the park, we started finding them deep in the park. And we didn't just find starting them deep in the park, we found them big like this, and we also started finding them small like this, newborn hatchlings. And so in the late 90s, some of our internal park scientists got together and published a paper that hypothesized as early as 2000 that we had a breeding population of Burmese pythons here in the Florida Everglades. Now, many of you are familiar with this guy. This guy is actually from areas where probably some of you all are from. Southeastern Asia, ranges throughout the area. It's a subspecies of the Indian python, Python maloris, and it's very commonly encountered in the pet trade here in South Florida. When we initially started finding these in the park, we thought it was like anything else, like finding Burmese boa constrictors out here or finding reticulated pythons. We thought that these were individuals that had been purchased as babies, got too big for their owners, and the owners came out and released them. It was when we started finding them deep in the park and started finding various size classes that we started to get concerned. And so in 2000 we published that paper saying we think we have a problem. And that was published in 2000. And for 3 years, nobody paid attention. Nobody cared. Nobody thought anything about it. Until we started having situations like this, where right on the Anhinga Trail, right where we came from, we started to see regularly python-alligator interactions. And the first one was in January of 2003, where we had a 6-foot alligator just show up on the trail with a 12-foot python wrapped around it. And the alligator had the python behind the head, and the python had the alligator in a body coil. And we watched that fight for the first time ever. No one had ever seen that old world serpent going toe-to-toe with our freshwater apex predator. And that fight went on for 24 hours, from 10 o'clock in the morning on the first day till 10 o'clock in the morning the second day. And on the second day when we showed up, the alligator still had the python in its mouth, and the python was really deflated.
Okay.
Right? It was just limp. This was in winter. Remember, in winter, we have a lot more alligators out there, and a bigger alligator approached this initial alligator and hissed, and this alligator responded. And the way she responded was she opened her mouth ever so slightly to hiss, and when she did, that python that we had all given up for dead tensed up and shot off like a shot into the bushes nearby, and we never saw it again. Here's what we knew. After 24 hours tangling with our apex predator, it was a draw. And we realized we had a problem. Now, we've seen lots of situations like that since then. Situations where alligators have successfully consumed and eaten the pythons, and we've seen situations where pythons have successfully consumed American alligators. Now, this is a rather extreme example. How many of you have seen this picture? Has anyone seen this picture before? Really? I call this the picture published around the world. This was captured in 2005. Let me explain what you're seeing here. So this is a 13-foot Burmese python, tail's here, wraps all the way around. This is where the head should be. By the time we found it, it had no head. And what's sticking out from its ruptured belly are the hind legs and the tail of a 6-foot American alligator. We don't know what happened here exactly, but here's what we can say. At some point, this python successfully consumed this very large adult alligator. And since we captured this image now, we have 10 case studies where Burmese pythons have successfully consumed alligators of different size classes. So we have a problem.
This is a crocodile you eat.
No, that's a python.
This is a python that ate an alligator.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said that.
It
was attacked by another big one.
That's a problem.
Don't really know. Most of us that are working on this think that what probably happened was after this python consumed this alligator, it was probably attacked by something else, causing the ruptured belly and the loss of its head. But it's all we'll never know.
Ecosystems.
In some new YouTube movie, I saw that.
We've got lots of YouTube movies now. Good old YouTube. So this is a problem, but this doesn't happen very often, right? The bigger problem is what happens every day with these pythons out here. Right? We know that Burmese pythons, like what we feed them in captivity, go after warm-blooded prey. And so they'll typically go after, if we look by species across their diet, every time we take one, we capture one, we bring it into the laboratory, we open it up, and we look at what it's eaten. And gut content analysis has told us that a little less than 75% of their diet is small to medium-sized mammals. A little less than 25% of their diet by species are birds, and wading birds, the ones down near the water surface that the Everglades are famous for. They're going for easy prey, right? This is problematic as well, and I'll explain why in just a second. I want to show you some very disturbing data. This is just removal data. These are the numbers of pythons by year that we physically remove from the area. Okay? You can see us starting in the late 90s with 1 or 2 individuals per year, and then starting past 2003 we see this exponential increase. Culminating in 2009 when we removed 348, I believe, individuals in that year alone. Okay? Now, this looks drastic, right? This looks like there's a population eruption going on, and there might be. But remember, in 2003 we had a very high-profile alligator-python interaction. In 2005, we had that picture published around the world. With all that publicity, we started assigning more and more resources to this problem, more boots on the ground. We refined our methodology, being able to find them. We had new technologies for being able to find them. And so our ability to capture them probably skews this graph considerably. Yes, we think there's an eruption. We're in the midst of it right now, but we also think that this graph reflects our ability to find them better, right? To date, into the present, we've now removed 1,825 Burmese pythons from in and around Everglades National Park over the past decade. 1,825. We think our detection rates of these guys are very low. They're built for life in the Everglades. They blend in perfectly. They're totally at home in that lake or elsewhere. And so chances are, especially in the 1.3-acre wilderness that nobody goes, they're probably out there in mass. The most we can say is there's probably tens of thousands out there, but we would never refine that estimate any further than that. Tens of thousands seems reasonable. Having tens of thousands of pythons in the park doing this on a regular basis would probably give you impacts that you would note, right? And we have published our first paper yet in January of this past year that seems to have documented at least what that impact is over time. We know they've been eating a lot out here, but what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? The science is finally catching up to what all of us have already seen in the field. All of us that have worked here for a long period of time, driving this main park road every day, you would count marsh rabbits by the dozens along the park shoulders as you drive on through. At nights, cruising the road, you'd see possums and raccoons like crazy. You'd find 9-banded armadillos, an exotic species, but they were out here. Now we're going to drive this main park road and continue on down halfway through the park, and then we're going to turn this bus around and we're going to drive it right back out to where we started from. And I challenge each and every one of you to try and find a single mammal out there. What that study published in January this past year showed was when we took data sets pre-invasion versus the long-running data set that we now have post-invasion, we've seen in some cases across taxa for mammals, we're seeing declines anywhere from 87 to 99% for things like bobcats, things like raccoons, things like marsh rabbits, or possums. When we talk about marsh rabbits and foxes, they've disappeared from the park altogether, 100% gone. I should say that study is correlative. We're able to look at the decline of those species relative to the spatial movement of this population over time. It's not conclusive, but common sense tells us we know what they're eating and we see the trend. This is probably the first impact we're noting from this invasion out here. And the problem's getting worse. We still continue to find females packed to the body cavity walls with eggs, and we have so far found a half dozen nests. They're hard to find the nests, but we found a half dozen thanks to telemetry studies, and almost all of them have had viable nests. So this problem is not going away. They're here for good. The question is, they're here for good. We have absolutely no management tools whatsoever to deal with this issue. Okay? What we've hoped for years was that we would at least take this 10 years worth of knowledge that we've gained from this invasive species case study and figure out what we did wrong and prevent something like this from happening again. Have we been able to do it? Absolutely not. January of 2010, we started finding these.
Oh
my gosh.
This is a totally different species of python. This is the African rock python.
Oh,
Northern
yeah.
African
Oh my gosh.
rock python. And in January of 2010, we confirmed that we now have a breeding established population of these guys just outside the borders of Everglades National Park in the outskirts of Miami. We now have a second large constrictor species established here in South Florida. What's interesting about these guys is they never cross paths in their native range. One's from Southeast Asia, one's from Africa. However, in captivity, they interbreed readily. And as many of you all know, hybridization can sometimes give you hybrid vigor, the passing on of stronger, vibrant genes into offspring. We may be right this very second creating super snakes in the Florida Everglades that we'll never be rid of. This story is interesting. It's captured a lot of attention, yet it's not unique. Snake invasions are a growing problem across the country. In fact, Mexico, you were just talking about the Yucatan, where we've got on the island of Cozumel a feral population of these guys, boa constrictors.
Boa constrictor.
And again, similar situation, not as large a constrictor, but there's no management tool in the toolbox on how to deal with these. We have found boa constrictors on the loose in South Florida. In fact, we have an established population of them. We've also found on the loose the second largest constrictor species, the reticulated python, all the time in South Florida. We don't think there's an established population yet. And we have found on a couple of occasions the largest constrictor species on the planet. What is this? Yep, green anaconda. And we have found them a couple times on the loose here in South Florida. Doesn't sound like much, but it takes only 2, possibly 3, to establish a new population. So this is a growing problem for us down here. We don't really know what the impacts are going to be. There's not a real good way to handle it. And the problem continues to get worse. This is one python. You know, we've got this huge population. It's erupting. We've also seen a decline in the prey base. What happens now? Do we see a typical predator-prey boom and bust cycle like we would? Or, as in other invasions, do we see a prey shift? Do they start going for other things? Or do the pythons start moving beyond where they are now and expanding their range in search of new prey? There's evidence to say all of that's happening. This guy was taken out from just north of the park in October of this past year. Exceptionally large individual, 15 feet in length. And when we took this 15-foot python and brought him back to the lab and opened him up, we found a full-size 87-pound female deer within it.
My God.
Oh, nice.
Now this has not been verified, but we think this is probably the largest single prey item for the species in the planet. So this is an exceptionally large prey item, perhaps a move of desperation in the absence of other available prey. We don't know. We also just, and I don't have a picture to show you of this, but just this past year captured not 1 but 2 Burmese pythons that had eggs within their intestines. And not their eggs, they had consumed fowl eggs. So one had caught 2 eggs from a limpkin, another's guinea fowl, probably from a farm outside the park. And this is revolutionary. This has never been documented in this species before, This species has always been interpreted as a sit-and-wait predator, an ambush predator, and now we have evidence that in the absence of available prey, maybe they're going to be opportunistic and start foraging for prey, which has big issues for us here in that we have these huge rookeries of wading birds, and these snakes are very agile climbers. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the years ahead. And to add to all of this mess, we have a never-ending introduction of new things down here. We have 2 established species of chameleons now, right outside the park. This is the Oustelets chameleon from Madagascar. We now have them all over the place. They're fantastic. We now have Nile monitors all over the outskirts outside this park and on the west coast of Florida. And just recently, not 1, not 2, but 3 Nile crocodiles fished out of canals in southwestern Miami-Dade County, southeastern Miami-Dade County. So this is a problem that we just do not have a good handle on here in the States. Just past January, finally, the federal government enacted laws saying you can no longer import Burmese pythons or trade them across state lines. Awesome. What year is this?
Yeah.
2012. Our scientists published the paper in 2000. Right?
So it's really behind the policy and the,
And those of you that work invasive species, you kind of understand where this lag comes from. And actually, I envy you because I think New Zealand and Australia and Israel are prime examples of countries, and correct me if I'm wrong, that have enacted sort of whitelist systems when it comes to importation. Is that true in your case?
It's true.
That is true.
You cross the border, you'll be searched, your shoes will be searched, and if they're not clean, they will be cleaned. Same with camping equipment, all sorts of things, everything will be cleaned.
I applaud that. I applaud. That's the move that we need to make here, and this country has tried twice to enact that kind of system, and we can't get away from a blacklist system where you import everything freely, and it's not until they do damage and cause measurable harm that then you blacklist them. Well, then the damage is done. Whitelisting is the way to go. We have a lot to learn from you guys.
When is the flowering season? Is it male flowers?
I never see the cypress tree flowers.
In March or maybe. Yeah.
In March in your area is when it happens?
Flowering season. Yeah. Male flowers. And this is a female flower, I think. Yes. Maybe. Yes.
How you know the female and male difference?
Well, I think this is like cypress trees. Oh no, cedar trees. So most of female flowers are formed on the top of the branch or needle, and well, male flowers are like this.
Oh.
Okay, there's no new rules. And the formation of buttress stem form and the new root is very important for this species. Yeah. So, but the mechanism of that, the formation is so difficult. So, I guess the major factor is ethylene is very important to stimulate them.
I don't know how many of you have been again to other national parks in the area or in the country.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got a place like Mount Rainier.
I'd like to know some information.
Mount Rainier, 14,404 feet in elevation, right? You go to other national parks like Yosemite, etc. They'll have their elevations posted. Such and such pass, 6,343 feet in elevation. Now, I watched all of you on the bus, and almost all of you were taking a siesta, snoozing on the way here. On the way back, though, watch the edge of the road. I want you to see our signage, because once we get 5 minutes south of where we are right now, we pass a sign that says, Rock Reef Pass, 3 feet in elevation. That's our high point in the area right here.
Wow.
60% of terrestrial Everglades National Park is at or below 3 feet in elevation. This is an area very innocent of topography, right? So when we talk about climate change, and we talk about climate change a lot in the National Park Service, it's having real-world impacts right now in parks. In 25 years, Glacier National Park may have no more glaciers. On timescales of decades, Joshua Tree National Park may see all the Joshua trees walk out of Joshua Tree National Park. And in places like Everglades, our big consideration has to do with sea level rise, obviously, right? We're a major area on the coastline. We're really blessed. We've got one of the longest running instrument gauges in this hemisphere right down in Key West, Florida. It's been taking tide measurements since 1846 and continuously since 1913. And if we look at that 150-year record, we know that we've seen 30 centimeters of rise over the past 150 years. Doesn't sound like much. But hey, it's pretty similar to what we see globally in terms of sea level rise. But more importantly, again, given the elevations of where we are, 30 centimeters is a very big deal. We're seeing a rise annually of 2 millimeters a year. In past decades, evidence says that's ramping up to 3 millimeters a year. Doesn't sound like much. But that rise we've experienced so far and the rise we're experiencing now has already generated observable, demonstrable effects to Everglades National Park. There are areas in the coast where through aerial photography, we've been able to document the inward migration of coastline from 5 to 1,000 feet over the past 50 years. Vegetation line that we hit in the park that demonstrates the tidal influence has moved inland 2 kilometers just over the course of 50 years. Right? And we're seeing wholesale vegetative changes right along the very edge and the periphery of the coast. The Everglades, as we know them today, formed during a period of time during the Holocene when sea level rise was 4 centimeters per century. And now we're ramping up to well past that. And so the question on everyone's mind is, all those mangrove forests, that huge mangrove coastline that I talked about earlier, will it be able to keep pace? And we don't have a really good answer to that just yet. Some evidence from the past few years tells us it could go both ways. We've seen areas where, thanks to the influence of tropical storms and hurricanes, we've had enough sedimentation dropped on those forests to raise elevations well beyond the 50-year need to meet sea level rise. And another case in subsidence has brought it way down. And so we don't really know what the future of this place is. Sea level rise will continue to be a really huge factor for us in the future. And we were just talking in Finland about the squeeze some species are feeling as they move further and further. Remember, this park was established primarily for the preservation of this landscape, this freshwater open sawgrass. And sea level rise, if it continues to work in collaboration with a lot of the other stresses this landscape is already feeling, the next time you come and visit us, 50 years, we may start to see this landscape squeeze out of Everglades National Park altogether. So it's an interesting thing to watch. We don't really know what to do about it yet.
Like the west coast is getting better, east coast is getting drier. So that's what you're experiencing.
Interesting. I wonder what the projections are over the long term. Veracruz.
Oh yeah, a lot of more the frequency and the strength of the hurricane. Before we have like a once every 3 years. Now we have 3 in 20 years.
Interesting. It'll be an interesting few years ahead for us, for sure. No doubt about it.
Yes, it has been very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, only I was missing mud walk, so
Oh yeah,
it's
they
easy.
prepare for the mud work. I was thinking, you know, we have to go to a glimpse for the conference. So at Castle.
Yeah, but I have like a lot. Yeah, I think it's very good example. Wonderful to see this whole Everglades from this perspective also.
So you think this EcoSummit tour is very good for you, get much more experience?
Definitely, I think even it's always interesting to see such a different places and different management practices and some positive examples how people have been working on the feed them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So, how do you think this trip, or where you from, and what you study?
My name is Susanne Krejcik. I'm currently a PhD student at Victoria University of Wellington, and I'm really glad that I had this opportunity today to see the Everglades National Park. I think it's a really beautiful park that's worth the effort of restoration and conservation, and I really loved seeing the alligators. That was really cool. And I thought that the ranger who introduced us to the area was doing a really great job as well. So this is definitely one of the great days I will have in my memory when I go back home. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Qin Pei, and you from the Nanjing University in China, and you are Vietnam scientist, and you hasn't been doing the Vietnam research for many years, and you have lots of experience. How do you think this field trip?
The trip is great. Give me a deeper experience. Yesterday we look a very big ecological engineering of wetland restoration. Yesterday the Professor Miao introduced us the hard work and show us a series of the ecological engineering science. Some of the sales gave us very deep experience. And today, I think very natural and very great. The rather deep experience is the water, very clean. So the walk of the national park show us a bottle of water and let somebody test it. Very good. So I think very good ecological restoration and very great the natural activity, natural energy give us deep experience. If just the walker ask us, welcome us back again. So I think if I have a chance, I will go back certainly. Everglades, very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.